Hello, you are most welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Real Impartation Moment on Tuesday Night Anatomy with Daniel Okwan. Today's section, we want to look at one of the basic tissues that we have, being the connective tissue. We already seen that of epithelial tissue, and we said epithelial tissue should be vascular, and that is why beneath every epithelial tissue there should be a connective tissue. Yes, we know connective tissues are going to, bind, support, insulate, perform immune function. Yeah, they are going to serve as covering materials. They are going to even serve as storage of fuel, among others, which you are going to see. What happens is that, yes, depending on the structure, depending on the type of connective tissue, yes, that will influence the type of function that particular connective tissue is going to perform. And so, at the end of this tutorial, yes, we will be able to identify the connective tissue type that we have, areas in the body that we are going to find them, and of course, the role that kind of connective tissue is going to play. And so, without much ado, let's set the ball rolling. So there we are. Now, if we take connective tissue, generally, connective tissues will have three main components, and these three main components will be the cells. Okay, of course, every tissue will be made up of cells, so cells will come together to form a tissue, so cells will automatically have to be present. Now, even when you take the cells, which you will see it in greater detail later, yes, we have those ones which are the intrinsic or the resident cells, and those resident cells mainly will include the fibroblasts. Yes, we also see some kind of undifferentiated mesenchymal cells, some pigment cells, of course, the fat cells being the adipocytes. Yes, even the histiocyte we can also consider it to be an intrinsic, cell. We will see that later. And then, of course, you also have the migratory, or of course, the transient or the temporary cells. And these ones include, of course, the larger macrophages. Okay, we have the mast cells, lymphocytes, plasma cells, monocytes, and eosinophils. So what we see generally is that these, migratory cells will be component of, coming from the bone marrow, actually. Yes, mainly, coming from, of course, the blood. Okay, so you see those ones, the white cells of the blood. Then, of course, these cells will also secrete the other components of the connective tissue. They will secrete the fibers, and these fibers will include what we call the collagenic fibers or the collagenous fibers, the reticular fibers, which are type 3 collagen, then of course elastic fibers, which we will see the various elastic fibers that we have. Then, of course, apart from that, we also have secreted by the cells once again, and also being part of the component of connective tissue will be, of course, the ground substance in between the cells, so intercellular ground substance, which actually amorphous, we will see that one. So these are the three main components of the connective tissue, and of course, depending on their proportion, relative proportion, you have a particular type of connective tissue, or how these ones are modified, you have various kinds of connective tissue. So as I said, these kind of cells, especially the wandering cells, yes, will be coming from the bone marrow. So the bone marrow, yes, mainly we are going to find them in the medullary cavity of long bones. Okay, of course, in the spongy areas, of course, in the diaphysis, you have the bone marrow over there. Actually, what we are talking about is the red bone marrow. Okay, so the myeloid, okay, those kind of areas, the cells that are coming from the bone marrow will form the myeloid lineage. Okay, those areas. Okay, now one thing is that if you talk about the bone marrow, we have two main areas. In the adults, we have what we call the yellow bone marrow, which is mainly for storage of fat, and of course, we have red bone marrow, where of course hemopoiesis will actually take place, production of these blood cells. So what happens is that, yes, this yellow bone marrow is for storage and therefore will not produce any blood cell, but the red bone marrow, yes, will be relevant in blood cell production. Meanwhile, in severe cases of anemia, what happens is that, yes, studies have shown that this yellow bone marrow could be reverted into red bone marrow for, to support, okay, hematopoiesis, okay, to support hematopoiesis. That would be a compensatory, mechanism that the body will have to adopt, in trying to, go through, circumvent that kind of anemic condition. Okay, so that's what, we have to know. So that is showing you, of course, the bone marrow, the red bone marrow. So there we are. Now, if we talk about cells of the connective tissue, we're saying that we are going to have two main cells type, And these two main cell types will be, of course, the fixed cell, which of course you can also call the resident cell, okay, and then of course you can also call a permanent cell or the intrinsic cells, okay, of the connective tissue. And these cells will include one of these ones being the fibroblasts. I'll show you another slide showing you the fibroblasts in detail. The fibroblasts will have large cytoplasmic projections, as you can see over here. And of course, it will have protein synthesis machinery, okay, and also endowed with mitochondria, so that, yes, of course, they can really secrete the extracellular matrix, including, you know, the fibers of the connective being the fibroblasts. Being of course the collagenic, you know, fibers. So that is what we are going to see. Apart from that, we also have what we call the adipocytes. Okay, so adipocyte, what we find is that, yes, the fat droplets will fill the cytoplasm, pushing the nucleus to the periphery. So you always see that for the adipose tissue, you find these adipocytes, a lot of them in there. And of course, during tissue processing, yes, the chemical will dissolve the fat over here, and therefore you see the peripherally placed, you know, nuclei around the areas. So that's what we are going to see. That's also one of the resident cells. Then of course, if you take the embryonic connective tissue, for instance, we have what we call the mesenchymal cells, okay, those kind of stellate shaped cells over there. Yes, those ones are also being resident cells, as well as some kind of pigment cells that, you know, we have. So for instance, you can see that cell with pigment, you know, granules. This one will be a resident, you know, cell. Then apart from that, we also have the free or the wandering or the temporary, or what I call the immigrant or the migratory cells, or the transient cells, or the cells we call them extrinsic cells of the connective tissue. They are mainly coming from the bone marrow or from the blood, okay, and therefore, yes, we include of course the white cells, which of course we have a mnemonic for it: never let monkeys eat banana. And you know, using this never let monkeys eat banana as a mnemonic, you'll be able to know the proportion in terms of, you know, these kind of cells in the blood. So N for neutrophil, so neutrophil is here, so that's the most populated white cell in the blood. Let for, you know, lymphocytes, okay, so let for lymphocyte, whether large or small lymphocytes. You know, M for monkeys, monkey is going to be the monocyte, although not shown here, but monocyte is going to have a single nucleus, of course, and it will be bean shaped, okay. Then, you know, eat for eosinophils. You can see that eosinophil is having bilobed, you know, nuclei, so bilobed nucleus, okay, generally. So, and then it's going to have this kind of, you know, reddish or orange red, you know, granules, okay, in its cytoplasm. Okay, that's what we are going to see. So once you are seeing that, then you know we are looking at the eosinophil. And then, you know, banana for basophil, okay, basophil. So basophil will also generally be bilobed, but also have coarse dark granules in the cytoplasm. But neutrophil, yes, which will have about 3, you know, to 5 loops generally, although, yes, of the nucleus. So we say it's polymorphonuclear leukocyte. So if you hear polymorphonuclear leukocyte, we are still talking about the neutrophil, having this kind of, yes, pinkish, you know, granules, which are fine, okay, in the cytoplasm. Okay, so that's what we see. But get to know that if the number of loops, okay, so this one I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If it goes beyond 5, 7, you know, 6, and all that, then it becomes what you call pathologic, where it's very consistent with what you call megaloblastic anemia, where it's a form of macrocytic anemia. So please get to know that these, cells are very important. Okay, so these are the white cells, we are talking about. Never let monkeys eat banana. But having said that, yes, what I want to show you actually is that if you take, for instance, the neutrophil will be very important in, fighting bacterial infections. And that is why during bacterial infections, the population of the neutrophil in the blood goes up. Okay, it becomes escalated. Now, let me be quick and tell you that although we are saying that neutrophils should be, the greatest, contribute greatest to the proportion of white cells in the blood, in children up to about age 15, what happens is that yes, lymphocyte population is rather greater compared to that of neutrophil. So if you see that in a child, then it doesn't show pathologic situation. Okay, it doesn't mean that yes, the child is suffering from some form of leukemia. No, but in children up to about age 15, what happens is that there's that kind of variation, such that lymphocyte population is greater than that of neutrophil population. Okay, so we have to know that one. Now, for eosinophils will be, very important as far as parasitic infections are concerned. Apart from that, even hypersensitivity reactions. Yes, we tend to see high population of neutrophil being, released. And then, of course, if we talk about basophil will be very important in secreting what we call histamine. Okay, so histamine will be very important as far as mediating this kind of hypersensitivity reaction. Talk about so whenever there is degranulation of what you call the content of the granules in the basophil, then histamine of course is released. Okay, and histamine is very important in causing of course vasodilatation, so that yes, the blood vessel become more permeable. Okay, so that the immune cells will go to the site of infection. Okay, so that is what we find over there. Now, for lymphocytes, yes, lymphocytes will be very important in that kind of adaptive immune response. So, for instance, we know that yes, if it is B lymphocyte, it's coming from the bone marrow. That's why we call it B lymphocyte, bone marrow derived. Then, when it is T lymphocyte coming from the thymus, so thymus derived. Now, if it's T lymphocyte, then we know mainly yes, those ones will be, very important. Here we have the CD4, or then CD8 positive, lymphocyte coming from, of course, the thymus. Those are the T lymphocytes. But the T helper, where is CD4, will help the B lymphocyte, so that the B lymphocyte could eventually be transformed into what we call the cell that we call the plasma cell. Okay, so this plasma cell, having this clock face appearance, is very important in secreting large quantities of what we call immunoglobulins, or the antibodies. And that's why we say that these T lymphocyte, the lymphocyte will be very important in actually the adaptive immune response. And so we know that T lymphocytes will be very important in the cell-mediated immunity, and then the B lymphocytes will be very important in the humoral immunity, helping to transform this kind of B lymphocyte into, of course, the plasma of course, the immunoglobulin producing plasma cells. Okay, so that is what we are going to see. Then, apart from that, we also have mast cell. Okay, so for mast cell, it's just going to have similar function to that of basophil, because that one will also be producing what we call histamine. Okay, to cause increased permeability of blood vessels. Then, apart from that, it will also secrete an anticoagulant. Okay, so an anticoagulant will be secreted by, of course, the mast cell. Okay, so if you look at the heparin, for instance, yes, it will be coming from the mast cell, apart from the histamine, which will be released from its granules. Okay, to help in ensuring that your blood doesn't clot inside you. Okay, so that yes, so that is one thing that is very important. Okay, by the mast cell. Then, apart from that, there's another cell who is also wondering. Now, this one is known as the macrophage. Now, the slender type that we find, confined to, of course, the connective tissue, is what we call histiocyte. So, histiocyte is considered as a resident cell, but macrophage generally will be considered as a wandering cell. Now, macrophage is coming from the white cell, what you call monocyte, having this kind of bean-shaped, appearance. We call it monocyte. And of course, monocytes coming from blood, when they get to some areas of the body, they will become what we call macrophages. Remember, the blood is a tissue. So when they get to any other tissue other than the blood, we call it, macrophage. So we can, for instance, we have macrophages of the liver, which we call it, Kappa cells. Macrophages of the lung, which of course we call them dust cells. Splenic macrophages are there. Talk about, the bone, which we call it osteoclast, the cartilage, chondroclast, for instance. So these are macrophages, okay, that we have. So macrophages will be very important in engulfing, okay, will be phagocytic, as well as that kind of neutrophil. They will both be phagocytic. So these are cells that we call them, yes, cells of the connective tissue, which we've seen. So there we are. I want to just show you something. Now, what happens is that anytime you hear the word blast, then it means that thing forms. So fibroblasts forming, the forming cell, okay? But if you are a site, you maintain, okay? Say that you don't form as many, but you help form. If there is anything that you have to add up, you maintain, okay? So that's what you do. So this is what we call the fibroblast that I was talking about. The fibroblast, as you can see, having this kind of nucleus with its nucleoli, and then on top of the just taking emerging from, of course, the nucleus, the membrane of the nucleus, we are going to have this kind of rough endoplasmic reticulum, as well as smooth endoplasmic reticulum will be there. It's also rich in a lot of mitochondria, okay, with a lot of cytoplasmic processes. So that's the active form of the cell that we're talking about, fibroblasts, so that they can actively secrete what we call collagen, okay, collagen, or the extracellular matrix, including the ground substance, okay, in there. So that is what we are going to see. Golgi apparatus to do the post chemical modification of the protein collagen, which will be made, and then after it has made that secretion, yes, it will get entrapped within its own extracellular matrix, and to become a quiescent type of cell, which you call it fibrocyte. And in this fibrocyte, you tend to see that there is little or less prominent cytoplasmic processes, okay, and then of course it becomes less less elongated, because of course its cytoplasmic processes are few, but of course its nucleus will be quite elongated, okay, with small amount, of course, those protein synthesis machinery. So that is what I want you to know over here. So just giving you a summary, in this table we've seen the fibroblasts, okay, and fibroblasts, yes, is going to make this kind of extracellular matrix to become entrapped, to become, of course, fibrocytes. Okay, so that's what we see. Then of course I also told you the histiocytes, they are spindle shaped or stele shaped cells, often dark staining nucleus with many lysosomal vesicles, because of course it is also that kind of a type of macrophage, just that is a resident cell. And of course that one, yes, we also have, of course, the macrophage, which is that kind of bulky cell, which is actually phagocytic, okay, helping engulf particulate matter in there. But that one presents with round pale staining nucleus, other than the histiocyte, which presents with dark staining nucleus, which is also slender. Then of course we said monocyte will give rise to the macrophage, okay, monocyte will give rise to the macrophage. We said the nucleus will be kidney shaped, okay, as we said. And then we also said the mast cell, okay, will be secreting, of course, some kind of histamine and heparin from its granules, okay, so that it can mediate that kind of inflammatory reaction, and also prevent clotting of blood, coagulation of blood in situ. Then we also said we have the polymorphonuclear leukocyte, mainly being the neutrophil, very important in fighting bacterial infections. Yes, we also have that of the eosinophil as well as the basophil, helping mediate hypersensitivity reactions or allergic reactions, or beta cell, yes, fighting parasitic infections. And of course basophil also secreting this kind of histamine to mediate inflammatory reactions. Yes, lymphocyte, we said we're going to have the B lymphocyte and of course the T lymphocyte, which are very important component of the adaptive immune response. Okay, the T lymphocyte helping in cell-mediated immunity. Then of course even the CD8 positive cells, okay, of the T lymphocyte also helping the B lymphocyte, okay, to actually become transformed into plasma cells, having that kind of memory, so that in future exposure to infections they can really combat them. Then of course, yes, we've seen the plasma cell, that the plasma cell will have this kind of clock face appearance, and they will be very important in making what we call immunoglobulins. Okay, now one thing that I have to show you over here, let me just come back and show you something. Now if it is chronic infection, then of course this kind of macrophage will be very important. Okay, if it's chronic infection, macrophages will be very important. But what happens is that if it is, an acute infection, then these kind of polymorphonuclear neutrophils, neutrophils, including, yes, we also add eosinophils and of course basophils, will be very important in acute inflammatory reactions. So that is what I want you to know over here. So apart from looking at the cells, yes, the cells are going to be very important in secreting this type of fiber that we have. Now it is now being packed. That kind of fiber is what we call collagenic fiber. So it means the protein which is made in making this fiber is called collagen fiber. Sorry, collagen as a protein. But it will be packaged into becoming this kind of collagen fiber that we are talking about. So yes, as I've indicated here, collagen fiber will be very important component of what we call, the connective tissue, but it is arranged to show that kind of branching, and it's going to have that kind of indefinite length. But one thing that we have to know is that it is the most dominant type of connective tissue fiber that we have, and it is very important as far as providing tensile strength. So areas where there will be a need for strength, then you have a lot of collagen. For instance, if you take the bone is having a lot of collagen, so that of course the mineral matrix could be built upon it. Okay, so that is what I want you to know. But one thing is that we have several kinds of these collagens. Yes, so we have a collagen table altogether. Yes, so what you have to know from this table is that, yes, you know the collagen types and some areas of the body that we find them. So for instance, collagen type 1, not only are you going to find it in bone and tendon, but also in the dermis of the skin. Then of course, if collagen type 2, yes, mainly cartilage, yes, we are going to see it there. The vitreous humor of the eye, that one too, we're going to see it there. Then if you take type 3 collagen, now type 3 collagen is a special type of collagen, and that type of collagen doesn't stain with connective tissue stains or routine hematoxylin eosin stain, and therefore you have to get a special connective tissue staining, and that is going through what we call silver impregnation technique, because those ones are able to help reduce that kind of silver metal which is in the salt into silver. Okay, so silver ion into silver as a metal. Okay, so that is what they are going to do that. So they are actually what we describe as being a gyrophilic. Okay, a gyrophilic, the type 3 collagen, therefore given a special name, reticular fiber. So please get to know that reticular fiber is a special type of collagen. Yes, that one doesn't stain with the normal collagen stains, or let me say the normal connective tissue stain, as well as hematoxylin eosin stain. They show that kind of branching so that they form meshwork. I'll show you that, and they will be very important in forming what we call the support system of the functional parenchyma of most lymphoid organs, including the bone marrow, yes, the thymus, the spleen, what have you, lymph node, you see them. Okay, so these ones, and one thing is that because they don't stain with this normal eosin hematoxylin staining as well as other connective tissue stains, we describe them as being a gyrophilic. Why? Because they stain with only silver salts or ammoniacal silver solutions, and in that they're able to reduce the silver ion into silver metal. So that is that one. So apart from these areas, you may also find them in some blood vessels. Okay, and then type 4, we're going to find it in the basement membrane. Type that of 5, we are going to see it the dermis, bone, of course tendon, as we've seen. Type 6 similarly. Then of course type 7, we are going to see the dermis and of course the urinary bladder. Yes, and of course if you look at some membranes, you're going to have the type 8, and then type 9 in cartilage. Yes, the vitreous. When you look at cartilage, we see that yes, these areas will have it, of course, especially hyaline cartilage. Then of course type 10, type 11 also in cartilage, and of course type 12 in tendon. So please get to know these areas where we find these kind of peculiar collagen fibers. Now apart from collagen fiber, we also have elastic fiber. So for elastic fiber, they are not going to really provide that kind of tensile strength, but what they are going to do is to help in that kind of recoiling. Okay, so that is what actually they are going to do. and as part of the proteins that they will contain glycine, proline, and some other modified protein amino acids like desmosine and of course isodesmosine. These are areas that we're going to find these these kind of amino acids will be present in there. And then of course they will also have high content of valine amino acid. So that is what they do. These ones are going to find them in areas where there will be the need for recoiling of that kind of tissue. So that is what we have. Now, even when you take this kind of elastic cartilage, I would say that it's a system of elastic fiber that we have. Now, what happens is that we have, with respect to the proportion of microfibril as well as elastin as proteins, microfibril protein as well as elastin proteins, then we have three kinds of elastic fibers, and these three kinds include one, oxytalan. So we have that of the oxytalan fibers, and that one we find only microfibril. So these dark staining slender-like fibrils, fibers that we find over here represent what we call oxytalan fibers. Then we also have what we call elaunin fibers. Now for elaunin fibers, yes, apart from having this kind of microfibril fibers over there, those slender-like structures, we also have elastin protein, okay, having that kind of deep staining orientation. Then even apart from that, we also have the elastic fiber proper that we're talking about, and that one will contain also both elastin and microfibril. So microfibril will be peripherally placed, as you can see over here, will be peripherally placed, and then of course centrally we have the protein elastin. So these represent the three kinds of elastic fibers that we have, depending on the proportion of elastin protein and of course microfibril protein. Okay, so please get to know these ones. Now, by way of giving you some kind of information, for instance, if you take oxytalan fibers, they will be more in areas like the eye and of course the dermis of the skin. So if you look at, for instance, elaunin fibers, they will be around areas like where we have sweat glands, and of course for elastic fibers, mainly in large arteries. Of course, elastic arteries, that's what we're talking about. So these things are very important that we know them. So having seen, of course, collagen and of course elastic fibers, then what is the distinction? What are we going to use as distinction? Yes, so there's distinction. Collagen, yes, is the main, structural, protein found in skin and of course connective tissue. So the main, the abundant type of fiber that we're going to find is going to be the collagenic fiber, with the elastic fiber form majority of connective tissue of elastic structures. So for instance, you see areas in the lungs, areas in the blood vessels, tunica media of some blood vessels, we see elastic fibers. Okay, so these ones will be some areas. Of course, even some kind of type of cartilage, being elastic cartilage, you see elastic fibers over there. Then, so collagen fiber is the third abundant protein in the human body. Then of course elastin is quite less abundant actually. Then it is a white protein in case of collagen. Collagen is going to be a white protein, but it will be yellowish in case of elastic fibers, and that is why if it's a fresh section, we tend to see that yes, it will appear yellowish. Okay, elastic fibers will appear yellowish. And then we've seen areas that we're going to find them, yes, blood vessels, cornea, muscles, and what have you. Also found themselves in some blood vessels and of course skin. Then we are saying that collagen fibers will be very important in conferring tensile strength, but these ones will be very important in providing recoil of those structures. But one important thing is that collagen fibers will be produced throughout life, until aging begins. So at old age, that is when its production level tends to go down, and that is why osteoporosis tends to take place at a very later stage of life. And then yes, in elastic fibers, they are mainly produced during the fetal life. Okay, so it is no longer produced after puberty. So that's what we have to know about this kind of elastic fibers we are talking about. And then deficiencies, okay, from collagen will result in osteogenesis imperfecta. We will see those ones, as well as chondrodysplasias. okay, as well as Danlos syndrome. Then for deficiencies of elastin, it will lead to, of course, something like Marfan syndrome, of course, atherosclerosis, and of course, emphysema, okay, for instance, in the lung. So these are some, distinctions that we have to know regarding collagen and, of course, elastic fibers. So there we are, as I was showing you. Yes, these represent the collagen fibers, okay, so they stain that kind of reddish appearance. But a type of this collagen fiber, being of course the type 3 collagen, is of course the reticular fiber. So reticular fiber will be dark stained with silver solutions, and therefore we tend to see them to be showing that kind of branching, forming a meshwork of those areas that we have. Okay, so that's what we find. And then of course you also have the elastic fibers. So elastic fibers, as we can see, forming that kind of, you can see these ones having those kind of microfibrils in there. Okay, so that's what we have now. So having seen, of course, the cells, we said the cells are going to make the extracellular matrix, and the extracellular matrix will include the fibers. We've seen the fibers. The fibers are the collagenic fibers or the collagenous fibers. We've seen the, of course, reticular fibers, and of course we've also seen actually the elastic fibers. We've seen oxytalan, elastin, and of course elastic fiber proper. So what happens is that, yes, we also have a third component of the connective tissue, being of course the ground substance. And so the ground substance, what happens is that we describe it as being amorphous, okay, and that one, yes, although we have some proteins, those proteins are not collagenous, please. So they are non-collagenous components of the extracellular matrix. Okay, so that's what we are going to see. And one thing I always say is that the ground substance is a very important component of the connective tissue, and that is the gluing material. Okay, so without the ground substance, yes, the connective tissue will fail to actually exist. Okay, so yes, it will contain some proteins, and these proteins will include what we call proteoglycans, glycoproteins, and of course glycosaminoglycans. But one important component that we have to know about every ground substance we have is that mainly it's going to contain about 70% of water. Okay, 70% of water will be present in there. Now, one thing that we say, now this glycosaminoglycans is actually very important to me. Now, this glycosaminoglycans, yes, formerly we used to call it proteoglycans. Okay, now these proteoglycans are long, unbranched chains of polysaccharides. Okay, with repeated units of disaccharides. Okay, so that's one thing. And an important component of this glycosaminoglycans will be this hyaluronic acid. And this hyaluronic acid is a very important component, and that is why some bacteria, for instance, have developed some enzyme known as hyaluronidase, so that they can break through the connective tissue and of course cause devastations in the connective tissue area. Even for instance, if you take the sperm cell, yes, the acrosome will secrete an enzyme, hyaluronidase, so that, yes, it's able to break through the membrane of the oocyte to, of course, fertilize it. And so these are certain things that we have to know. Apart from that, we also have the sulfated and the non-sulfated proteoglycans, or the glycosaminoglycans we're talking about. And the sulfated ones will include chondroitin sulfate, dimethyl sulfate, keratan sulfate, and heparan sulfate. So all these ones are examples that we are going to see. Now, specifically, if you take something like proteoglycans, there's a difference between proteoglycan and glycoproteins. So if we say proteoglycans, then it's actually the main thing is that it's protein with some moiety of carbohydrate added to it. Then if you take glycoprotein, yes, mainly it's carbohydrate with some protein moiety added to it. And so examples of these proteoglycans like vesican, decorin, these are some examples. Some examples will also, yes, if you take them like the glycoproteins, fibronectin, laminin, fibronectin, tenacin, for instance. These are those examples that we have. Now, very important is that, yes, this kind of ground substance that we're talking about, they will arrange themselves in several forms, such that they can perform a particular function to a particular connective tissue we are talking about. So for instance, in case of blood, they will be viscous, so to speak. Okay, in case of blood, this ground substance will be viscous. In case of cartilage, they will be semi-solid, so that it can confer that kind of pliability to these kind of cartilages. If it's, for instance, bone, it will be solid. Okay, very solid, ground substance. Calcified by something we call calcium hydroxyapatite, for instance. Okay, so that is one thing. Now, whether it is going to be semi-solid, going to be that kind of solid, or it's going to be that kind of viscous in that fluid nature, they are going to be serve as an important medium for exchange of that kind of materials. Okay, very important in between, of course, the cells, and then maybe source and the blood. And this is very important also in the development of tissue, also in migration, some proliferation. Some proliferation will also be taking place, as well as modification of cell shape. Yes, they will be very important in that regard. But I told you that this kind of ground substance will be amorphous. Why? Because when they are stained with, for instance, PAS, yes, periodic cartilage strips, what happens is that they appear clear. Okay, they will present with that kind of clear space that we have. So these are the things, yes, we are talking about the ground substance, the third component of what we call connective tissue. So there we are. In summary, what are we talking about? We said that if you take connective tissue, it will have three main components. It will have, yes, what we call the cells. And the cells, they are organized into the Fetal or the resident cells. They include the Fibroblasts, Adipocytes, some Fetal, Reticular cells. Now, if we talk about reticular cells, it's actually a type modification of this fibroblast. Yes, that is a bit rounded, not slender in the case of fibroblast. So that one, or we also call reticulocytes, will be very important in secreting what we call reticular fiber, a type 3 collagen fiber, which of course we know that collagen fibers will be secreted by, of course, fibroblasts. Then we also said there will be some kind of pigment cells to make some pigment, also being part of the resident cells. Then we also have wandering cells, or the temporary cells, including mast cells, leukocytes, or the white cells, macrophages. Okay, these are those things that we have. Then we said that these cells are going to make the extracellular matrix, and the extracellular matrix will have two components. One is the fibers, and the fibers are the collagenous or the collagenic fibers, reticular fiber, and of course elastic fibers, which we've seen. Then the third component, which is also secreted by the cells, will be the ground substance. And the ground substance, yes, they could be in the form of fluid or viscous nature. They could be gel-like, yes, solid or semi-solid. So those ones are those ones that we've talked about. Okay, so that is that. So that is it. Now these connective tissue components will arrange themselves, or they will get modified slightly to give the various kinds of connective tissue. For instance, loose connective tissue, you see that. And then of course, adipose, blood, of course, some kind of fibrous connective tissue. Okay, dense, regular, dense, irregular, like the bone, like cartilage. So these are the connective tissues that we have, and they are all coming from the components of this connective tissue that we made mention of. So having seen this kind of component of connective tissue, then what are the functions of this connective tissue that we have? I've already mentioned some to you, and one of them will be very important in establishing a structural framework for the body, helping in transporting fluids and dissolved material like the blood, protecting delicate organs like the bone, supporting, surrounding, and interconnecting other tissue types. Yes, very important. Like if you take the loose connective tissue, if you take the dense irregular connective tissue like the capsule, they will be serving as covering for these things that we have. Then they will also be very important in insulation. Okay, so for instance, the fats, the white what do you call it, fat that we have, yes, they will be very important in insulation. Yes, you also have storage of fuel. Okay, very important, like storing triglycerides. And I said they are going to perform immune function because we have a lot of white cells over there. Now, even apart from covering these surrounding these areas, for instance, if you take something like perimysium, if you take endomysium, perineurium, endoneurium, of those things are those kind of coverings that these connective tissues are going to play. So these are some important that the connective tissue is going to perform. Now, having seen connective tissue, we already discussed that of epithelial tissue. So then, what are the distinctions that we can bring between epithelial tissues and of course connective tissue? So one, for epithelial tissue, they showed sparse or no intercellular space, as we saw the last time. And then for connective tissue, we will see that there will be relatively large intercellular space. And then connective epithelial tissues are found apical to the base membrane. So on top of the base membrane, I told you that yes, separating the epithelial and of course connective tissue will be a non-cellular basement membrane. Now this non-cellular basement membrane, apical to it is where we are going to find the epithelial tissue, and then basal to it is where we are going to find what we call the connective tissue. Now epithelial tissues, we saw that it will develop from all the three trigeminal layers of what we call the embryo, ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm. But for connective tissue, it will develop only from mesoderm. Okay, that's what we have to know. And then for epithelial tissue, we said that they lack blood vessels, they are avascular. For connective tissue, they have a lot of blood vessels, so they are vascularized. And then for epithelial tissues, yes, there is no extracellular matrix. We didn't show any extracellular matrix in there by way of ground substance or fibers. But in the case of connective tissue, apart from the cells, we will have extracellular matrix being present by way of fibers and of course ground substance. And then for epithelial tissue, yes, the functions will include protection, secretion, absorption, sensation, for instance. And then for connective tissue, we've seen some of the functions. They help connect or glue certain structures together. They provide that kind of support, comfort strength, for chemical storage by way of storing triglycerides, and then they will also be very important in insulation. Also in thermogenesis, we will see those ones. So these are some functions performed by, of course, the connective tissue, and these are the distinctions that we have between epithelial tissues and, of course, connective tissue. So there we are. Now, if we take connective tissue by way of classification, we are going to have two main kinds of connective tissue. We are going to have the fetal connective tissue, which you're going to find it confined to, of course, the fetus. And then we also have what we call the adult connective tissue. Now, if you take the fetal connective tissue, we will get to know that the fetal connective tissue will be made up of, the fetal connective tissue, you can also call it embryonic connective tissue. And that one, yes, is made up of what we call the mucous connective tissue or the mucoid connective tissue. And then, of course, we also have what we call the mesenchymal or the connective tissue mesenchyme. Now, it's actually the connective tissue mesenchyme portion of the embryonic or the fetal connective tissue, which will give rise to the adult or the mature form of this connective tissue we are talking about. And this mature form of connective tissue is also organized into two groups. Yes, these two groups are what we call the ordinary, connective tissue, which of course we also call it connective tissue proper. Okay, so if you hear of ordinary connective tissue, we are still talking about connective tissue proper. And then we also have the specialized connective tissue. Now, if you take the specialized connective tissue, yes, we include the blood, cartilage and bone, which we'll look at in the later section, not today. So we look at blood, we look at cartilage, and then we look at bone as specialized connective tissue later. But for you take the ordinary or the connective tissue proper, we have what we call the loose connective tissue and of course the dense connective tissue. Under the loose connective tissue, we have connective tissue areola, we have adipose tissue, and we have reticular connective tissue. Then if you take the dense connective tissue, we have what we call the dense regular connective tissue and dense irregular connective tissue. Now one thing over here, even when we talk about this dense regular, dense irregular thing, they're actually collagenous. So we can say that we have what we call collagenous, connective tissue being dense, and we have elastic being dense. If it is collagenous, then we have the regular and irregular. Okay, if it is elastic, it can also be regular and irregular. But if we take the collagenous, the regular type, we are going to have seen them in tendons, in aponeurosis, and of course in some ligaments. Then for the dense irregular, yes, we are going to find some areas like capsule of organs, the reticular layer of what we call the dermis, for instance. We're going to see all these ones in the what we call perichondrium and what have you. You see all those ones. Okay, so that is what we have. So in another classification, what we see is that yes, we've seen that we have the fetal connective tissue or the embryonic type, which is going to give rise to the adult form. So they have a common origin being the mesenchyme. I told you mesoderm, and that one we are going to have connective tissue proper. Okay, so it's this classification they are saying that we are going to have connective tissue proper, supporting connective tissue, and then fluid type of connective tissue. If it is fluid, blood or lymph, for instance. Then if it is the supporting type, We can see those ones with a semi-solid matrix being the cartilage, and then those ones with a solid ground substance being of course the bone, for instance. So if it's a bone, it could be compact bone or spongy bone. You see that later. And then of course, if it is cartilage, yes, you're going to have hyaline, elastic, and of course fibrocartilage also being present. Now, if it is connective tissue proper, then we are going to have what we call the loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue. Okay, and then the loose, we've seen them: irregular, adipose, reticular. And then if it is dense, regular, irregular, and of course the elastic type. So this is another means of classifying this kind of connective tissue we're talking about. So there we are. We said that we are going to have what we call embryonic connective tissue. Now, if it is embryonic connective tissue, then what we find is that usually, because at the embryonic stage, what happens, the fibers are not fully developed. So usually we tend to see a lot of cells with fewer ground substance, and that is why morphologically, yes, what we call the fetal connective tissue or the embryonic connective tissue appear like loose connective tissue morphologically. Because if you want to see loose connective tissue, usually we have a lot of cells. So we can see we have a lot of cells, but even the fibers, they are less to see. They are difficult to see them because they are less developed. Okay, so that is what we are going to see regarding the embryonic connective tissue. So what happens is that, yes, we have a lot of cells. These cells are the stellate shaped cells. We call them mesenchymal cells. Okay, stellate shaped mesenchymal cells. Okay, and these cells are going to help make that kind of fibers over there, and those fibers, they are not fully developed. Okay, because we know these fibers are supposed to be secreted by fibroblasts, which in the adult type. So these fibers, they are less developed. Okay, so that's one thing. Now, if you take this kind of embryonic connective tissue and you want to compare it to that of the adult connective tissue, if you take the embryonic connective tissue, we have two kinds. We have what we call the mesenchymal connective tissue, and we have what we call the mucous connective tissue. Now, mucous connective tissue, yes, although in some books they will say we find it only in the Wharton's jelly of what we call the umbilical cord. Yes, we have some areas that we've seen some of them. Yes, like the pulp of developing tooth, like the nucleus pulposus of the intervertebral disc, like the vitreous humor. These are some areas that we're going to see this kind of mucous connective tissue. Now, if we take mesenchymal connective tissue, yes, we find it in the fetus as well as the embryo. But what happens is that you're going to step as the stem connective tissue, or let me say the progenitor connective tissue, to give rise to the adult connective tissue types. Okay, so that is what we are going to see. Now, if you look at this now comparatively, if you compare this kind of connective tissue mesenchyme to, of course, the mucous or the mucoid connective tissue, you can see that the ground substance, apart from the cells, you can see that there are some fibers relatively being present, and that makes the background hazy compared to that of the connective tissue mesenchyme. So mesenchyme, you can see that the cells are a bit fewer compared to that of the case we find the mucous connective tissue. And you can see that the ground substance or the background in the case of the connective tissue mesenchyme is relatively less noisy compared to that in the case of the mucous connective tissue. So that is what we have to know. Now, the other one is the loose connective tissue. So I was trying to explain what this loose connective tissue is. Now, if we want to say something is loose connective tissue, then we are going to see a lot of cells. Okay, so we're going to see a lot of cells being present. Also, we have large, ground substance also being present. Then we have fewer fibers. So you can see that these one, the fibers are relatively fewer comparatively, and therefore this one is a loose connective tissue. Loose connective, but you can see the amorphous ground substance being a lot, occupying large space over there. So we said that beneath every epithelial tissue there should be an underlying connective tissue. That connective tissue immediately beneath every connective epithelial tissue is an example of what we call the loose connective tissue, or we can say lamina propria. There's, if we talk about the endomysium, the endomysium of course for the muscle. If you look at the endoneurium of the neuron, yes, these are examples of areas you're going to find it. If you take the blood vessel, the tunica interna or the tunica intima, its subendothelial layer is loose connective tissue. If you look at the papillary layer of the skin, the dermis of the skin, you are going to find this architecture also being present. So these are some areas that we're going to find in the human body presenting with this loose connective tissue orientation. Now, another loose connective tissue which we find now, specifically this loose connective tissue that we saw is actually what we call areolar connective tissue. Areolar connective tissue. Now, this type of connective tissue that we find, yes, we said that if you stain with the routine hematosine eosin stain or connective tissue staining generally, we aren't going to see them unless you stain with what we call silver staining, and that is where you see this kind of forming this kind of branching fibers over here. You can see these fibers branching, and these are dark staining fibers, and these ones forming that kind of meshwork, forming the support system of the functional parenchyma, for instance, the lymph node, bone marrow, liver, spleen, some endocrine glands, for instance. Okay, these ones represent what we call, for instance, the thymus. These ones represent what we call the reticular connective tissue. Reticular connective tissue is also a loose connective tissue. You can see we have a lot of cells over there. You can see a lot of cells over there with fewer fibers also being present. But you can see there's large, amorphous ground substance also being present, the whitish area, so to speak, in the background, as you can see. Now, these ones, we said that we are going to rather see some rounded cells over there, okay, which are not slender-like in the case of fibroblasts. These are modified type of fibroblasts, and these are called reticulocytes or the reticular cells. They are going to make these kind of reticular fibers. Now, especially we find these ones in lymphoid organs, and that is why we tend to see some kind of lymphocytes also being present, some white cells being present, lymphocytes being present. Okay, so that's what I want you to actually know. So these fibers, I want to emphasize once again, they are agyrophilic. Now, the next type of loose connective tissue is what we call the adipose connective tissue. Adipose connective tissue. And for adipose connective tissue, what we find is that classically they have a large droplet or smaller droplet of fat filling the cytoplasm and thereby pushing the nuclei to the periphery. So you see that the nucleus will be peripherally placed. Now, whether it is going to be peripherally placed, yes, we are going to have two kinds of this adipose tissue, and these two kinds are what we call the white adipose tissue and of course the brown adipose tissue. So this one, you can see this, there's a large droplet of fat, and in these ones areas in the cytoplasm we have several droplets. I'll show you in a better view, several droplets of fat. So once you are seeing that, then we are looking at brown adipose tissue. Brown adipose tissue will be will be endowed with a lot of blood capillaries. We have a lot of mitochondria as well, relatively compared to the white adipose tissue, and we will have several droplets of the fat filling the cytoplasm. In the case of white, a single droplet of fat filling the cytoplasm. Then one thing is that the brown adipose tissue will be very important in non-shivering thermogenesis. Heat production will be very important, by what we call the adipose tissue. And that is why the fetus is endowed with a lot of this kind of brown adipose tissue. Because nature recognizes that, yes, there will be some negligence coming from some mothers. And therefore, yes, this area, we have a lot of this one in most, in the fetus, in several areas of the fetus. Now, in adults, mainly we find them in females, and they'll be restricted to some areas like the interscapular region, in between the scapulae over there. Then, one thing is that for the white adipose tissue, yes, they are vastly distributed in the adult, for instance, in the breast, in the gluteal region, yes, around the kidney, like the periphrenic fat, the paraphrenic fat, for instance, around the eye, periocular area, yes, even the great omentum, yes, you are going to find this kind of areas where we have a lot of, fat over there. But those ones are not needed for non-shivering thermogenesis. That's what I want you to know. So by way of comparison, you can see a single large droplet of fat, okay, peripherally placed nuclei, okay, this represents the white adipose tissue, and then you can see several droplets, okay, and it is brownish because having a lot of mitochondria, it's having a lot of blood capillaries over there, and it's very important in shivering thermogenesis. And that is why we call the brown adipose tissue, the multilocular adipose, because we have a lot of several droplets of fat, multilocular. But in white adipose tissue, we call it unilocular adipose tissue. So by way of giving you some more distinction, yes, between brown and of course white adipose tissue, yes, the first point, brown adipose tissue is a dark, yes, colored adipose tissue which rapidly produces heat in infant and small animals. Yes, that is what you said. Then this one is actually a storage site for that fuel. It's going to store it, a single droplet. Then we are going to find it in the shoulder blade, the scapula, and under the skin. We are going to find the white, the brown adipose tissue. But you're going to find, white adipose tissue, yes, apart from the hypodermis of the skin and around those areas like, the gluteal region, the breasts, the greater omentum, what have you. Then we said that, yes, cytoplasm occurs throughout, the cell, and the nucleus can be found in the center of the cell. Now, usually during development, yes, it can be found over there, but usually as several droplets of fat get in the brown adipose, they tend to push it peripherally. Then, of course, for the nucleus, yes, it will be pressed towards the peripheral aspect in the case of the unilocular adipose tissue, because that one there's a single droplet of fat to push it to the periphery. Then we've seen it, brown adipose tissue is multilocular, several droplets, unilocular in the case of white adipose tissue. Then we have several mitochondria in the case of brown because of the non-sharing thermogenesis that has to take place. Then we have fewer mitochondria in case of white, highly vascularized in the case of brown, less vascularized. Okay. Then we said that it's very important for thermogenesis in the case of brown. Then it's not going to be relevant in that kind of non-sharing thermogenesis. Then one other thing is that, yes, it's going to have this kind of hormone which we call a leptin. Okay, there will be some kind of leptin which will be related to, but you don't have that kind of leptin in the case of white adipose tissue. Then in the case of brown adipose tissue, it produces heat. We've said it already. So that is what we are going to see regarding the distinction between white and brown adipose tissues. So by way of summary, that's what we have. There's the areola being a loose connective tissue. Okay, areola loose connective tissue. And then we've seen the areas that we're going to find them. Yes, you can see it by way of description, gel-like matrix with all three fiber cell types. We have the fibroblasts, macrophages also there, mast cells will be there, with some white blood cells also being there. Okay, that's what we've seen, and that's the areas in the body we are going to find them. Adipose tissue, by way of description, yes, it's going to have a similar orientation as that of now. This adipose tissue is loose connected because we have a lot of cells. Fewer fibers will be present. A lot of these adipocytes with peripheral placed nuclei are adipocytes. Okay, so that is what we have. Then we also have reticular. Reticular will have this meshwork, dark staining with silver salts, so that at the end of the day, yes, what they are going to be doing is that they contain a lot of fibroblasts. Okay, reticular fibers. Okay, reticular fibers, and I said they are modified fibroblasts. Okay, that we find them. A lot of these reticular fibers, even some lymphocytes will be present, because at the end of the day, lymphoid organs, they are the area that we're going to see these ones. Yeah, so the next thing that we want to look at, apart from looking at the loose connective tissue, yes, we've seen loose connective tissue being one of the connective tissue proper, or the ordinary connective tissue. We go to what we call dense type of connective tissue. Now, for the dense type of connective tissue, we are talking about the dense collagenous type, and this one we begin with the dense regular connective tissue. So for dense regular, what we are going to see is that we are going to find fewer cells by a lot of fibers. You can see these a lot of fibers, with these whitish areas representing what we call the ground substance. So it is dense. Why? Because we have a lot of what we call fibers than ground substance, and of course the cells. And you can see that the fibers, they run parallel to one another. So by way of running parallel to one another, then it's very important that they are going to resist pull, okay, or resist stress in a single direction. Okay, so that is what we are going to see. And one thing too is that, yes, we said that if you are a fibroblast, okay, the cells over there, mainly fibroblasts, after making the product, they will be entrapped to become what we call fibrocyte. So most of the cells that you find over here, they are actually what we call fibrocyte with fewer fibroblasts, because at the end of the day, they've made enough collagen. Unlike in the case of loose connective tissue, where we have fewer, collagen fibers, and therefore most of the cells over there will be fibroblasts with fewer, fibrocytes. We'll see that. So some areas in the body that we're going to find them, yes, in tendons, in aponeurosis, and in some ligament, we are going to find these areas that we call, dense regular connective tissue. Now, so although we are saying that, yes, this kind of connective, we are going to find it in tendon, aponeurosis, and ligament, there are some distinction, yes, histologically. Sometimes we see that kind of distinction between a tendon and ligament, which you have to know. So one thing is that we know that grossly tendons will connect, yes, muscle to bone, and then connecting, of course, bone to bone will be a ligament. Then tendons are tough and inelastic, but ligaments, yes, they are strong, and then sometimes there will be some kind of elastic fibers also being present. Then if we go to tendon, it's a modification of white fibrous tissue. But in case of ligament, it's a modification of yellow elastic, connective tissue. So there are some elastic fibers being there in some ligament mostly. And then fibroblasts lie in row, okay, almost continuous. But in the case of ligaments, most ligaments, they will show that kind of fibroblasts, okay, being scattered. And then the fibers are seen as dense parallel bundles, but the fibers are densely crowded but not arranged in a parallel bundle. That's in the case of ligament. So in some ligament, that's why I stress that we're going to find what we call dense regular connective tissue. This is the distinction that we have. Now, the next type of connective tissue, dense connective tissue, is the dense irregular collagenous connective tissue. Now, if you don't add the word collagenous, we are still talking about the important fiber being collagen, okay? And these ones, the dense irregular connective tissue, we find them in areas like the periosteum, perichondrium, in the submucosa of the gastrointestinal tract. Yes, the postpharyngeal gut, for instance. If you take the tunica albuginea of the testis, for instance, if you look at the reticular layer, okay, of the dermis. Now, we said that the dermis, the skin, will be made up of two layers, two connective tissue areas. The papillary layer is made of loose connective tissue. The reticular layer is made up of dense irregular connective tissue. Also in around capsule of organs, capsule of solid organs, yes, we are going to find, talk about the capsule of the lymph node, the spleen, talk about the thymus. These areas are going to have what we call dense irregular connective tissue. And that is why the fibers, because the fibers are oriented in different directions, they're able to resist tension, okay, or force in what we call several directions. In any direction, actually, that's what they are going to actually do. Okay, so this is what we call dense irregular connective tissue. So we can see the fibers. Why is it dense? Because we can see fewer cells, and then ground substance is also fewer, but we can see a lot of fibers. A lot of fibers are in there. Okay, a lot of fibers are in there, and the fibers are running in different directions. They are not running, parallel to one another. No. So having seen the loose connective tissue and the dense connective tissue, let's see some distinction that I find for you. And for loose connective tissue, yes, we are going to see what? More cells will be present, okay? But in the case of dense, yes, relatively fewer cells will be present, okay? Then, in the case of loose connective, because the fibers are fewer, we have more fibroblasts being present than fibrocytes. But in case of dense, because a lot of the fibers have been made and trapping the fibroblasts to become fibrocytes, we have more fibrocytes being present than fibroblasts. Then for loose, the fibers are fewer and loosely arranged. Now, in the case of the dense, the fibers are more, because you compare fibers to, of course, the cells. The fibers are more in the case of the dense, okay, and they are compactly, arranged. Then, of course, we said that they could be regular or irregular. That's what we find. Again, with the ground substance, we have more ground substance in the case of the loose, but few ground substance, or relatively small ground substance in the case of the dense type of connective tissue. Then, some areas that we find them provide support for blood or lymphatic vessels, muscle and skin for the loose. Then of course, mainly for the dense tendons, aponeuritis, ligament, capsule, perichondrium, and what have you, periosteum, and what have you. These are some areas that we find the dense type of connective tissue. Now, apart from the dense collagenous type, we also have what we call elastic connective tissue. Now, if it is elastic connective tissue, it's actually dense. Okay, so you can see this densely packed elastic fibers over here, densely packed elastic fibers over here. And that this densely packed elastic fibers, yes, in fresh section, they tend to be yellowish because elastic fibers mainly being present, and they are found, to provide high, what we call, to help in organs where there will be the need for recoil. Okay, there will be the need for recoil. Okay, so areas like tunica, media of elastic arteries, okay, it will be very important in some portions of the lung to help in that kind of respiratory movement. Okay, so these are some things that we have. And of course, in the vertebral column, you find those kind of things over there, some ligaments associated over there, and those ones will have what we call elastic connective tissue being endowed with them. Okay, so these are certain things that I want you to know. So having seen elastic connective tissue, then there's something we call elastic cartilage, which of course in our next section we will look at that, although I've done a video on that. You can go and watch that one for now. But what happens is that there's that kind of distinction which you have to bring to clear our doubt. There's a distinction between elastic cartilage and of course elastic connective tissue. So let's look at these distinctions. Now, a cartilage that is more opaque, flexible, and elastic than hyaline cartilage. Okay, that's the elastic cartilage we are talking about. Okay, and then for connective tissue, it's actually elastic connective tissue, it's actually a dense type of connective tissue having a lot of elastic fibers. Okay, so that it can actually help in that kind of recoiling. So if it's elastic connective tissue, it's an elastic cartilage, but in the case of elastic connective tissue, it's a dense type of connective tissue. Then in the case of elastic cartilage, we have these kind of sulfated proteoglycans being there, like the chondroitin sulfate. But this one, in the case of elastic cartilage, we are going to find elastic fibers, and they do not have that kind of ground substance being chondroitin sulfate. Then in the case of elastic cartilages are relatively stronger, okay, than elastic connective tissue. And then for elastic cartilage, they will contain those kind of cells, we call them chondrocytes, but you don't find chondrocytes in the case of elastic connective tissue, but rather you have those kind of fibers as well as fibroblasts, okay, also being present. You have relatively small portion of fibers, collagen fibers also being present. Then for elastic cartilage, they will contain both type 1 and type 2. Actually, they will contain both. Mainly, yes, they will contain type 2. Actually, it's rather fibrocartilage which will contain type 1 and type 2. But yes, in elastic cartilage, they will contain type 2 predominantly. Then for elastic connective tissue, contain the collagen fibers, small amount of collagen fiber that will be present will be type 1. Okay, and the area that we distribute elastic cartilage, which we will see later, will be things which are related to the ear. Okay, talk about the external ear, the pinna, talk about the epiglottis, talk about the pharyngotympanic tube, okay, like the eustachian tube, talk about the larynx. Okay, these ones are some areas of the like the epiglottis. Okay, those ones will have elastic cartilage. But elastic connective tissue, which we've said already, yes, apart from the skin, the dermis, the tunica intima of media of blood vessels, some ligaments associated with the vertebral column. Okay, these ones will be some areas, like in the lungs, will be some areas where we have elastic connective tissue. So that's the distinction that we have to know. So in summary, what have we learned? We've learned that yes, connective tissue, yes, they are going to be very important components, okay, helping support organs, gluing them to other structures. They are going to perform immune function. They are going to cover, insulate, very important in thermogenesis and what have you. Store. What specifically we said is that we are going to have three components, being the cells, being the fibers, being the ground substance. And then we said that with respect to the proportion, so for instance, if I have more cells, more ground substance with relatively fewer fibers, it becomes a loose type of connective tissue. If I have less cells, less ground substance, but more fibers, it becomes a dense type of connective tissue. So depending on the specialty that we have, then we give it a particular name. So if you take the loose connective tissue, we are going to have, specifically areolar connective tissue. So usually if we say loose connective tissue without qualifying it, know that we are talking about areolar connective tissue, and they are going to be very important in binding organs together, okay, in the lamina propria or the papillary layer of skin, dermis of skin, between muscles, beneath epithelial tissue. We said all these. Then adipose tissue. Now, if you see a connective tissue and you can see about 2 or 3 adipocytes in there, it doesn't make that tissue, adipose tissue. We have to see a lot of these adipocytes in there to declare that tissue to be an adipose tissue. And those ones will be very important in protecting, insulating, and then of course storage. Okay, and we've seen those areas where they will be distributed. In reticular connective tissue, yes, they are forming a meshwork. Type 3 collagen fibers will be there. Okay, and that one will be agyrophilic, and they form the support system of the functional parenchyma of these lymphoid organs mainly. And then for the dense, it could be dense. Dense, it could be collagenous, or it could be elastic. If it's collagenous, yes, you've seen the areas. If it's dense, regular tendons, aponeurosis, some ligaments. But if it's dense irregular, like the papillary layer, the reticular layer of the dermis of the skin, for instance, will be there. Okay, if you talk about capsule and what have you of organs, will be there. Then for elastic connective tissue, they'll be very important in providing that kind of recoiling. Okay, so that yes, we find them in some areas of the vertebral column, in the lungs, some areas over there in the tunica media or blood vessels. Then we also have seen some cartilage. We see the cartilages in the blood, what have you. They represent the specialized type, which we didn't do today, like the hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, fibrocartilage. We see them. Look at the areas that we've disposed them. So the next time we meet, you understand them better. We have the bone. Yes, bone will be very important in providing support. Cartilage will be pliable. Okay, very important. And then for blood, it will be very important transport medium. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you find this helpful. Yes, in our next session, we look at the specialized connective tissue, being of course the cartilage, bone, and of course the blood. I hope you find it helpful. Have a good night, and may God richly bless you.